This is part 2, so make sure to watch previous episodes. Now we see Judith, who was eating a lot of food and force feeding Irene. Two Lloyd's men try to disturb her but get disturbed themselves. Lloyd forbids his boys from doing so and says that it would be good for them. Judith likes this thing of jerk. Then Irene sees Lindsay, who is sitting alone eating food. Judith makes a strange face and asks him if there was any argument between them, but on this even Irene could not answer it. He asks Judith how is Lindsay these days, as they are both in the same class. Judith jokes with him at first and then tells him that Lindsay is no different. She is the good as she was. Her talent is just as great, so everyone is a little scared to go near her. Also, Lindsay going to the training hall at night and learns the sword techniques of her family. Now we see that Judith and Irene were training together and Lloyd was watching them. Judith and Irene have a fierce fight, but in the end Judith wins and teasingly tells Irene that if he wants he can go to small training hall and meet Lindsay. Now we see Lindsay, who was doing some sword technique. Then she comes to know that Irene has come here and asks him what he is doing here. Irene gives him a gift with a small scroll. She asking him why he is giving it to her. Irene tells her about his younger sister who used to gift him this way when she made a mistake, but Lindsay says that if he is doing so she teach him back, then it will not happen. Irene says that it doesn't matter to him, he just wanted to apologize. Lindsay later reads scroll and calls it childish smilingly, but when she opens the little gift box a bracelet comes out, but it leaves her very nervous and a little scared, but suddenly she becomes normal again. Judith and Irene are about to start training, but then Lloyd comes up to them and tells them that he wants to interact more with the two of them. He looks back at Irene and says that the concentration he has, it's not him, so Lloyd wants to learn it from him, and in return he will teach Irene swordsmanship and techniques. Judith asks him what his real intentions are. Hasn't Lloyd tested Irene before? Is he just using Irene? Lloyd says that yes, he is using Irene, but what is bad in it? If Lloyd wants he can be satisfied by being a train himself, but such method is insignificant here, and it is not only for him but also those people who will use Lloyd. He tells Judith that he only trains with Irene after the classes are over, but she needs someone with more powerful. That way training should be done. It is an opportunity for them to learn from each other and compete with each other to achieve higher quality growth. Hearing all this, the rest of the children were also getting motivated. Irene accepts his offer, but he tells Lloyd that he is weak in all matters. What he wants to learn from him. Lloyd tells him that you have something that I don't have. He was thinking about it for a long time. He used to think that he trains like Irene. Then why is there such a gap between them? The time for training was also almost the same, but he was not able to know what he lacked. But then one day he understood what it is. From the beginning of the training till the end, Irene never loses his focus. He asks how to sharpen his concentration like him, but Irene also does not know about this. Lloyd says that every genius says this. Irene says that he is not a genius, but Lloyd thinks in his mind that you are a very big genius. He tells Judith that from tomorrow we both will train together, but she angrily says that I haven't answered it yet before leaving. He gives an advice to Irene that he doesn't need to feel so weak. He belongs to Farah family, which is a noble blood. He didn't know about it before, but now Irene fit to the name after doing such things. That's why he should be proud of his noble and should also show confidence. But Judith doesn't feel good in this talk. Now we see that Lloyd was teaching Irene how to use a sword. Judith leaves and Lloyd asks her for a duel, but she angrily refuses. Judith and Irene were having dinner when Lindsay comes and thanks him for the letter. Judith asks Irene if he gave her the love letter. Irene gets very shy after hearing this and says that there is nothing like that. We now see Irene lying on his bed wondering how he can further increase his concentration. Thinking this, he falls asleep. After this he have a strange dream. Here some strange sensation was happening in his hand. In a short while this sensation spreads to his whole body, as if this sensation comes from that man. With this he suddenly wakes up and see it's still late in the night, but he wanted to catch the sword before this sensation was over. The next morning Irene was looking very tired and Judith Lloyd was in duel, but Lloyd starts looking the other way. Judith angrily asks what he is looking at. Irene was sleeping quite tired, but suddenly he wakes up and swings the sword and falls asleep again, but everybody felt strange. Here Lloyd comes to him and apologizes for disturbing him and asks what he is doing. Irene says that it is something like an exercise to improve concentration. Lloyd says that it is something like meditation which priests do to control their mind. Irene finds this a bit odd, but he says something like that. Lloyd also tries to do something like this, but during this he falls asleep. After a long time a boy wakes him up and asks why he was sleeping, but he says that he was meditating. Judith asks him if you are doing meditation, then why saliva is dripping from your mouth. Now Lloyd understands that the problem was in his posture. That's why he decides to sit and do meditation, but Judith explains to him that it only works on that particular guy. Lloyd says that she too should try this meditation, after which we now see that all the children sit together and start meditating. Now we see that in the duel between Lloyd and Judith, Lloyd wins. Judith rejected it, but because of the instructor she has to accept it. Lloyd was able to feel that he has improved a lot and he may now be able to compete with Lindsay or even beat her. Now we see Irene, who is training meditation, has helped a lot, but there is still a lot to improve. Then Lloyd comes there with Judith and tells that the swordmaster had called all the students for a meeting in the martial arts hall. While giving a speech, the swordmaster tells everyone that it has been 9 months since all the students came here and he is very happy to see their growth, but only then students get sweaty when swordmaster says that the time has come for their final exam. Means final Evaluation, like midterm evaluation, the qualification will not be seen in this but the future potential of the students. Will be seen how far they can progress, but they don't need to worry so much. It's not that difficult as they think. They just have to show their sword style which they have mastered. It doesn't matter what the style is, and now they have only days left, after which the headmaster does a sword dance of his own in front of everyone. There was a rhythm in each and every step of his, with energy and power as well as equal charm and creativity coming out with each of his moves. Along with this, he ends the dance with his last move and starts leaving from there. Seeing this, the mouths of all the children remain open. Now we see that Lloyd and Judith were very tired after training, so they were taking a break. Lloyd says that Swordmaster's dance was great, but only then he realizes who he is talking about. But Judith is not in a good mood. Lloyd asks her if it is because of Irene. She was really upset, but Lloyd says that he will surely pass. But Judith angrily asks him, how do you know about it? Lloyd says that because this time the criteria is a bit different. This time the Swordmaster has talked about potential and who has the most potential in the last 9 months. Judith understands this and gets engaged in training again and thinks that this time first place will be to win, but Lloyd says that Lindsay will win the first place because her family is the continent's most powerful warrior, so it is obvious that she will win the first place. But Judith gets very angry and says that there is no reason why she can't win first. Plus Lloyd says that swordsmanship is in her blood, but Judith gets angry and says that if it is already decided, then why are we fighting? She says that what is so special in her family, her brother was the biggest prodigy of the continent, but he was defeated by an orphan and now he is choked with shame. She was saying all this, but as soon as she turns back there, Lindsay stood there. The other kids started to panic. Lindsay says with chilling eyes that she doesn't care if people say bad about her or her family. It doesn't matter what people say behind his back. Judith was ready to fight him, but Lloyd stops her and says that if she fights without permission, she will be fired. Lindsay tells that she will win first place this time too, and this will continue to happen. The family swordman is not needed by her. She can defeat them only through the things learned from the academy. But Lloyd stops Alia and asks if Lindsay family's swordsmanship is Sword of Sky, which they got from defeating the demonic dragon who ruled for years. Lindsay asks what about it. Lloyd says he wants to see it, but Lindsay flatly refuses and starts leaving. Lloyd says that if she does not do this, then he will win first place. Now we see Irene, who is training, feeling like he is getting too far away from that sensation. He sits down and starts meditating again. But right now he feels that what happened if he holds sword and do meditation. Then Judith comes to Lloyd and asks him to hold his sword, after which they both start training, where Lloyd was getting heavy on Judith. Judith was having a lot of trouble fighting in front of him as compared to earlier, as he had become very strong and fast. She wonders if it could be that Lloyd can really beat Lindsay and win first place. She admits that she cannot defeat Lloyd yet, but because of that she can now has courage to defeat him by becoming an official trainee. Lloyd was a bit tired, so he asks Judith to stop the training for now, as they may overload before the final exam. Judith agrees to it. Lloyd asks her, are you not angry today? Judith says she has to do many things. He asks what is that thing. She tells if he tries to know everything he will be harmed. Lloyd thinks with great confidence that now he might be able to beat Lindsay and he can be able to bear Irene straight. We see Irene, who was thinking that he has changed everything, but still there is no improvement. Then Judith comes there and asks him if he likes to train all day. She asks him to come out with her to get some fresh air, and Lindsay sees them both leaving. They both come to a big meadow and start resting. Judith asks him if he is prepared properly. Irene asks what was the preparation for. She says that only 2 weeks are left for the final exam. Irene says he will give his best as always, but Judith doesn't seem to have the energy for it. Irene asks her if she is confident. She says, don't you know your sis yet? She is absolutely confident. He should ask when she is going to beat Lindsay, but Irene had doubts. Then Judith tells her sorry because she has not been able to take care of him for a long time. Earlier they used to train together and she used to help Irene to improve his awkward moves. There is no need for apologies, Irene said, but out of the blue Judith tells him that she is an orphan. Fearing this, Irene also gets a little shocked. Judith immediately says that she is not asking to get sympathy. When she was young she had to steal and pickpocket to survive in this terrible world. When she looked around, he came to know that everyone is living in the same way, be it big or small. Because of living this way of life, she has never got a chance to thank anyone. That's why instead of thanking him the day when Irene saved her, she got angry instead, and to tell the truth she still finds it awkward to say anything straight. That's why she removes her favors in her own way. Suddenly she says, you have to pass. Irene doesn't understand it properly. She says no matter what happens, pass the last exam and become an official student so that she can help him properly. Irene makes a promise while giving a smile. Now because of this, Judith becomes very embarrassed and says that now I should leave from here before I become embarrassed and die. Irene thinks in his mind that there is no need to say sorry. Judith, rather I should say sorry, I could not take care of you properly. He thinks that this year his life has changed in a lot of ways. A lazy prince who was always lying in bed is sitting here under the dazzling sky today. Year was not so bad for him. Only then he thinks that he got to know himself a little more, and because if he got these feelings and thoughts for this, he is thankful to all of peoples along. With this he raises the sword and does not meditate but allows it to happen. Meditation is a kind of act which makes the mind strong, so he lets it come from within himself. 2 weeks pass and it's time for their final exams. Now we see a Boy who is showing his swordsmanship. Headmaster praises him and the instructor says that this time many students are doing well, even those with lower ranks. Another boy's turn comes which cuts the stone right in the middle. Though with smoothness, the headmaster thinks it is doing quite well but is still lacking, after which now comes the turn of Judith. Judith goes to the headmaster and asks if she can duel someone to show her skills. Her opponent has also said yes. The headmaster finds interesting and asks who is the opponent. His opponent was actually Lloyd. A fight starts between them and Judith says that today I will defeat you. Lloyd says that I would also like to see this. Judith takes a stand and attacks Lloyd with full speed, leaving him slightly stunned. The sword of both of them collides with each other and many people get shocked by its sound. Judith was going on it back after attack one after the other. Lloyd was sweating. People could not believe seeing her speed. Lloyd was also having some trouble. Then he does a sword slash, but Judith escapes by jumping and attacks on Lloyd, but Lloyd also stops it with his sword. The instructor finds both very good. The fight of both continues. The red hair instructor likes Judith's strong slash, but he also sees that Lloyd is easily avoiding difficult attacks. Then Lloyd attacks with a sword and this attack passes through Judith's face and she gets hurt. Judith calls him a bastard. Lloyd asks her, were you going to defeat me with this? But Judith starts attacking again aggressively. Judith wanted to make more powerful attack and Lloyd had to increase his speed with the last attack. There is a huge explosion, the smoke clears and we see Judith, and her wooden sword was broken but Lloyd's sword stood firm, and with this Judith could not able to surpass Lloyd. The instructors compliment their match, but it turns out that Lloyd is a little too good in the two. The headmaster likes the match very much and praises them. They both bow their heads and say thank you. After this it was Lindsay's next turn. Lloyd thinks that he is not the same as before. He has improved a lot in himself, so maybe now he can beat Lindsay. The headmaster asks her what she is going to show today. Lindsay says that she will show her family's sword style. Headmaster was very eager to see the sword of the sky. This technique had cut the throat of Dragon King. She takes the sword in her hand. Lloyd was smiling while watching, but suddenly his smile disappears. Lindsay started the sword style. Along with it a very fast wind started. There she moves with her sword style. Energy starts spreading from all sides like lightning. As soon as its real power comes in front of everyone gets quite shocked. Judith was just standing there. She could not understand what was happening. Lloyd also could not believe what he had just seen. He imagined a wall that he can never cross, though it was the turn of the last student, who was Irene. Judith starts cheering him, but Lloyd had a strange feeling that he was denying Irene. In his mind he remembers when Irene told him that he gets a warm aura from Void, and he considers Lloyd to be a very good man who took care of him, but Lloyd told him at that time that he is not as good as Irene thinks him to be. He starts praying in his mind that just Irene should not do something unexpected. He was getting very nervous. Irene comes in front. Headmaster asks him, what will you show? All the students start looking in that direction. He says that he will perform vertical slash. Everyone is surprised to hear this. A student gets very angry and calls him and shouts that we have not come here to see all this, but the instructor stops that boy, but he himself was worried about.
Technique had cut the throat of Dragon King. She takes the sword in her hand. Lloyd was smiling while watching, but suddenly his smile disappears. Lindsay started the sword style. Along with it a very fast wind started there. She moves with her sword style. Energy starts spreading from all sides like lightning. As soon as its real power comes in front of everyone gets quite shocked. Judith was just standing there. She could not understand what was happening. Lloyd also could not believe what he had just seen. He imagined a wall that he can never cross. Now it was the turn of the last student, who was Irene. Judith starts cheering him, but Lloyd had a strange feeling that he was denying Irene in his mind. He remembers when Irene told him that he gets a warm aura from Lloyd, and he considers Lloyd to be a very good man who took care of him. But Lloyd told him at that time that he is not as good as Irene thinks him to be. He starts praying in his mind that just Irene should not do something unexpected. He was getting very nervous. Irene comes in front. Headmaster asks him, what will you show? All the students start looking in that direction. He says that he will perform vertical slash. Everyone is surprised to hear this. A student gets very angry and calls him a moron and shouts that we have not come here to see all this. But the instructor stops that boy. But he himself was worried about what Irene was doing in the final exam. He takes his sword stand and completely empties his mind. The headmaster thinks you show now. He smiles in a very scary way and says that my sword dance didn't impress you. Now tell me the reason. Show me your real swordsmanship, Irene. Irene was in a state of meditation. He takes a deep breath, tense up his muscles, focuses on his heart, on the deepest core. He finds himself in an imaginary world. He did not know who that man is. What was he trying to slash? But now he doesn't need to do much. All he needs to is will, which give him the strength to go through the intolerable sufferings. Will that strong as steel and unshakable like mighty. Irene becomes one with that mysterious man. His eyes turned exactly like that man. Along with this, he hit sword slash on the ground. The slash was so powerful that it kept moving forward, tearing the ground. Seeing this, everyone is shocked. Their eyes pop out, their mouths remain open. And the worst condition was of Lloyd. Due to the slash, the earth was torn apart, and it was divided into two parts. Judith wanted to say something to Irene, but then she saw Lloyd being trembled, clenching his own fists, and the headmaster was looking calm from outside. After which now he was about to release the results of the final exam. Here the final interview is still pending, but he will still take the names of the students from lowest to highest, after which he starts taking the names of all the students one by one. Judith comes at 4th number, Lloyd at number 3, Irene is on the 2nd number, and as always, Lindsay comes first. Headmaster praises all the children and tells that they will be informed before the final interview. Now we see Lindsay, who opens the door and walks in, saying, "I knew you'd be here," the person still training after his final exams, which can only be Irene. He also sees Lindsay, after which both sit together at a place. Lindsay tells him that he has become very strong. Although Judith and Lloyd are also very strong opponents, it is only in the case of Irene that she felt that someone was chasing after her. First place was very close, normally it would have been bad, but this time she enjoyed it. The slash that Irene showed was very powerful. Irene panics in embarrassment. Lindsay giggles and says, "You're really bad at taking compliments." This talk was going on, but suddenly Lindsay says that she is leaving Chrono Academy. Irene is shocked to hear this, asks her immediately what and why. Lindsay says that this time the response was not too bad, on which he blushes. Lindsay says that she had no plans to become an official trainee in the first place. She was going to return home after becoming number 1 in all the exams. Then she suddenly asks Irene that, "Do you know who is the continent's greatest genius?" Irene says that he doesn't know exactly. Carl, Lindsay, Ilia's older brother. Lindsay was just 7 years old. His brother was very famous, and there was almost no one who did not know his brother in the whole continent. At the age of 10, he had become a very powerful warrior. His talent was so tremendous that no one can do this at the age of 10. For this reason, many big people started praising him, and he became the continent's greatest genius. But he never stopped and always kept improving himself. But one day a commoner who won first place in all the exams in Chrono Academy, but did not become an official student. She was considered the continent's second prodigy, who raised her own mercenary army at the age of 14. Her name was Ignat. He immediately challenged Ilia's brother, and because his family always accepted duels and never refused anyone, that's why the fight starts between them. And winner was Ignat. She defeated her brother in only 3 moves. Ignat also said that she was quite disappointed. Seeing her hero lose for the first time, Lindsay comes running and hugs him. Her brother tried to console her by saying that everything is fine, but she believed that her brother would win in the next duel, but it never happened. People started treating him coldly, because of such behavior of the world, because of people's mockery. He came under a lot of pressure, unbearable pain. Seeing her brother breaking down in this manner, Ilia made up her mind, which is why her brother locked himself in the room. She was determined that she would not care anything, win or lose, no matter what people say. It would not make any difference to her. But she was wrong about this. She came to Chrono Swordsman Academy at the age of 12, because Ignat was 13 years old when she won first place. And because of this reason, she became an official knight at the age of 14. Because Ignat became an official knight at the age of 15. But now she is leaving all this. Irene doesn't believe, that's why he asks if really. Lindsay says in her mind that this is true, when she saw that Irene does not care about anyone's words, and continues on her way. This resolution has come in her because of that. She will follow her heart from now on. No matter which way it goes, she will reach its peak. Irene calls him amazing, coming out of all those difficulties, and achieving big goals, leaving the academy. Irene doesn't have such a goal yet, but Lindsay says don't say such silly things, means don't let your guard down. Lindsay says to him, do work hard, otherwise she will overtake him. Irene smiles and wonders if he himself is really doing well. He holds the sword in his hand and thinks whether it is really right. After which we now see Lloyd, who is standing near the crevice made by Irene, and seems to be in shock. Then Judith comes there and calls him young master and tells that this place is still under construction. She was trying to encourage Lloyd, but Lloyd was still standing there sadly. In the middle of the conversation, Lloyd says that he is leaving. He says that someone learned to hold a sword just a few months ago, became powerful, while he himself was working very hard for so many years. But how long will it take him to reach this level? And he even thinks whether it is really possible. He thinks that all this is only for the chosen people. After which he thanks Judith for so far and starts leaving. But Judith stops him and throws a power punch. Lloyd collides and angrily asks Judith why did she do this. Judith says, what has happened to you? You are not able to dodge even one of my punches. What happened when you were dodging all my slashes comfortably? Judith starts punching him more and asks if your body has also gone bad along with your mind. She asks who taught this chosen etc. shit. Then there's Judith, who couldn't beat a coward. She was giving punches and asks who if people learning swordsmanship do you think they all are wasting their time? Judith finally stopped beating and told that later you should feel proud of yourself, that you had defeated the continent's greatest swordsman, which is enough to make him boast throughout his whole life. For those brats who give up because of such pathetic reasons. 7 days pass. The headmaster is sitting in front of Lindsay, who asks her if she got what she went to the academy for. Lindsay says that she is satisfied now. But she says with a smile that it is not because she won the first place. After which she leaves after thanking the headmaster. Next trainee is called for interview. Headmaster asks Lloyd if he is serious. His grade is flawless. It is not just about the exam. What he has shown to them is outstanding, which can inspire others. The headmaster himself has high expectations from him, but Lloyd was still depressed. He says that I am sorry now that confidence is not there in me. Headmaster understands that his spirit is broken, so he does not stop him and lets him go. The next turn was of Irene. The headmaster praises him a lot and says that he was been most impressed by Irene in his entire career. Head says that he will give him an advice now as the midterm exam award is still pending. Irene was ready to listen. The headmaster says that before I give you any advice, tell me what is the reason for you to wielding the sword. Irene thinks that because he wielded the sword. Irene gets a little nervous hearing this. The instructor tells him that there is no need to think so much. There is nothing bad in it if he has done all this for fame or money. As long as this thing does not go against the moral principles or whatever, it is okay. Irene still could not tell. Headmaster understands and asks if you did not wield sword with your own will. Irene says yes to this, but the instructor does not understand this and asks the headmaster, but he also says that he too not know properly. But when the headmaster thinks about it, he feels strange, because Irene has been more delighted and serious about the sword than everyone else, but he never felt the emotions that should have come from inside Irene. Lloyd was most happy when he came to know that his skills are improving, and Judith used to get very angry when she lost. Every trainee shows emotions, but Irene never did. The headmaster asks him whether you are imitating something. Irene thinks about that man and says yes. Head says that as he thought, but he is quite surprised that he even come this far with imitating someone without his own will. But he will not ask about it. But if Irene wants to wield sword in future, then he will have to think seriously about it. If he does not have a reason to wield a sword, then there can be no reason for him to stay in this academy. It is more important than him to know who he really is, rather than staying here just swinging the sword. Irene thanks him and says that he will never forget Headmaster's last advice. Headmaster says, why are you saying last? You should not be so negative. Irene says that he didn't understand. The headmaster calls and asks to drop his blood in golden plate. Irene drops a drop of his blood on a golden-colored thing, and writing starts appearing on it. The headmaster tells him he has 1 year to find his own sword path. Irene happily tells them that he will find his own sword path definitely. Now we see that Lindsay meets Irene at the gate and gives him a thing. Actually, it is the Lindsay family crest. If Irene shows it to the gatekeepers, at least they won't misbehave with him. Lindsay will also give him flowers if he comes to visit her, Agnes, which is also on the bracelet that Irene gave her as a gift, if he comes this time next year so she can give him flowers. Irene promises her that he will definitely come. But then Judith comes there and asks for that shining crest from Lindsay. Lindsay hesitates. Judith said if she doesn't want to give, then no problem. Lindsay says nothing like that. Judith says then give it to me. Judith is very happy to see the shining thing and thinks that it will be sold for a very expensive price. But Lindsay does not like it. That's when Judith has apologized to Lindsay. She had made fun of her family earlier. She didn't have anything like family till then, so she said those bad things. Lindsay also apologizes to her because she also didn't say anything nice about her. But Judith asks Irene why he is standing there smiling. Irene says he likes peace. But Judith gets angry. Then they see Lloyd, and Irene go by running to him, and asks why are you leaving academy? Did something happen? Lloyd looks at him with slanting eyes, and says that I do not need to tell you this. Irene says that there is no need to tell him the secret. Lloyd asks him are you going too? Irene says he is also leaving but he will come back to academy after finishing his personal training. Lloyd thinks you still want to improve, unlike me who already give up. Irene suddenly thanks Brett. It is because of him that he became who he is today. Irene feels alive when he swings the sword. He can't tell but there is a slight change in him within 1 year. Because of this he decided to learn swordsmanship and came to the academy. But he have learned all this from him, Brett, to recognize the mistakes of the past and move forward. All this has happened because of him. So he is very thankful. Lloyd wanted to say something but then his servant comes there with a carriage and calls him. Lloyd starts leaving sitting in the carriage. But Irene screams loudly and says promise me Lloyd, that we will meet again after being strong. Lloyd sitting in the carriage was quite shocked. Judith comes to Irene and says that your goodbye seemed like lovers. Just then Irene's servant comes there with a carriage and asks about his friends. Irene says that these are colleagues of my academy, that is, friends. Hearing this, his servant gets quite shocked and bows before Judith and Lindsay to thank them for being Irene's friend. After which he starts leaving sitting in the carriage. Now only Judith and Lindsay were standing here. They find it awkward. That's why they go their own way too. Judith looked sad and walked looking down as she became lonely again. But someone puts a hand on her shoulder. As soon as she looks back, she finds Lloyd was standing there, which tells him what is there on the ground that you are walking while looking in this way. Judith is very shocked to see him and asks what are you doing here? Lloyd says that I am from Lloyd family so giving up is not good for me. And anyway there is no one to handle Judith's aggressiveness after Irene left. That's why he has to stay with Judith. But Judith says what the hell are you talking about? Lloyd asks her are you not happy with my arrival? Judith said shyly in anger that what are you going to talk about all this? Lloyd says that Irene told me that whenever Judith blushes when she is angry, it means she is in affirmation. Judith asks to keep quiet and if the headmaster will accept you again in the academy. Lloyd says that if he does not agree, then I will make him agree by begging in front of him. And they both go to the academy from the gate. Now we see that Irene was going home in carriage. Irene was a little sad because of being separated from his friends and was looking outside the window. But Servant thinks that Irene could not pass the final exam, that's why he is so sad. Just then he sees an object in his young master's hand, but is suddenly taken aback because it was the Lindsay family crest. And he asks Irene where he got it. Irene says that his friend gave it to him. Irene understands that the Lindsay family must be very large, that's why the servant is being so careful. They both reach a place on the way and decide to spend a night in the inn. Irene wanted to find his sword path as soon as possible, so he starts meditation. The same servant was getting very upset and was trying to hear Irene's voice inside the room. He felt that Irene was very sad because of his failure. That's why he makes some plans. Servant sees an orc who is doing fortune telling. He thinks that orcs are mostly like North, what is it doing in southeast part of the continent. And this was no ordinary orc, because the pendant worn around his neck and the tattoos suggest that this orc is a fortune teller. After which the servant brings Irene to this orc. The servant has brought his young master here so that the orc will say something good about him and he will be happy. That orc was telling them about his fortune teller skills, but suddenly stops and asks Irene's age. Servant does not understand why he is asking age. Irene tells his age is 16 years, but on hearing this the orc laughs and says that he has seen Irene face baby. But he cannot make real fortune if Irene lies, but he says that he is not lying. The orc says that I can see you, if you want, you can be accepted in any night order. The servant was listening to all this and was getting very angry, because he had brought Irene here to make him happy. The servant shouts at the orc and calls him fake and asks his young master to leave quickly. Irene also starts to leave, but the orc stops him and gives him a thing that will come in handy whenever he is in trouble and cannot get out. Seeing the body of the Irene, orc understood that he is very powerful, and the bigger thing is that his aura was very solid. That too in just a 16-year-old child, on whom he could not believe at all. He wonders if he will ever be able to meet this mysterious being again. While leaving the carriage, Irene was thinking about the paper the orc had given him, in which it was written that one no need not to be alone to stand alone, the meaning of which he could not understand. Then he wonders if he was able to see the man Irene sees in his dreams at the time the orc asked his age. The servant says that he came to know only when that orc asked Irene's age, and on top of that he made such a joke with a man who is just coming after failing in the exam, saying that Irene can be accepted in any night order. Irene tells that he has not failed. He has passed, but not right now. He will rejoin the academy after completing the task of headmaster. Then the man driving the horse tells them that the Garon family's carriage is approaching. This is the same boy who once said bad things to Irene, and people thought that because of this, Irene started training. Servant forbids Irene to come out by making an excuse, but Irene decides to get down because otherwise it would be her cowardice. They both come out and the servant great Aaron Garon, and with him stepward Jack was also there. Garon looks at Irene and thinks that this guy looks strong and fit. Garon laughs and asks Irene, are you coming back from Chrono? Servant says that of course, but what is the reason for Garon to come here? The boy says that he has come to deliver a message on behalf of his father. Then he asks Irene that it has been a long time since they met. Irene also agrees. Garon says that Chrono has changed Irene completely. He is recognizing him with great difficulty. Then he asks Irene if he is going to pursue his sword training. Irene says maybe. Garon says that it will be good for you because you started late. Servant gets very angry on hearing this and thinks that Garon is a year younger than Irene himself. But Irene was not bothered. He asks that he has something else to say. Garon said no awkwardly, and Irene starts leaving from there saying that he is very tired because of the long journey. Setward Jack thinks whether he is really lazy lord. But Garon gets angry and stops Irene. He says nothing much, just to shake his hand. Irene asks why. Garon thinks, bastard, but restrains his anger and says that when swordsmen's hands meet, then they gets to know the strength of each other. He also asks his stepward about it, and he is forced to say yes. And he moves his hand forward. Garon tries to crush him as soon as Irene gets his hand, and tries to see by how Irene suffers. But Irene stood there without any emotion. Irene was not applying even a bit of pressure, yet Garon was in pain. Only then Irene remembers that he too had to apply pressure. As soon as he exerts some force, Garon's condition worsens and he starts shouting and withdrawing his hand. He could not believe that he was shaking hands with Lazy Lord. Because of this, he feels a lot of embarrassment. Those people were doing all this here, but then someone calls them from behind. Actually, it was a cat, but not a common cat, a sorcerer.